Imagine living in a place where practicing your faith is not just frowned upon, but outright restricted, where simple acts of worship could be met with hostility, and even the right to exist peacefully feels threatened. Sounds shocking, right? Well, in today's world, there are countries where Muslims are not welcome, facing harsh restrictions and discrimination just for following their beliefs. In this video, Top 10 Countries Where Muslims Are Not Welcome, we'll take you on a journey across the globe to uncover where Islam encounters the most opposition. From cultural roadblocks to outright bans, these countries present some of the toughest challenges for Muslim communities. You might be surprised by what you'll learn. Some places you'd never expect are part of this list. But we're not just talking about legal restrictions. We'll also dive into the social dynamics and the realities that Muslims face as minorities in these regions. Stick around as we reveal the full list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. You don't want to miss this eye-opening countdown. And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy learning about global issues that truly matter. Number 1, Myanmar. Kicking off our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome, Myanmar holds the number 1 spot, but not for any reason you'd want to celebrate. The Muslim minority here, specifically the Rohingya community, faces some of the most brutal persecution in modern history. You'd think the right to live peacefully would be a given, but in Myanmar, that's far from reality. With a population of 55 million, Muslims make up around 4.3%, yet they endure some of the harshest human rights abuses, driven by state-led violence and widespread discrimination. For Muslims in Myanmar, practicing their faith isn't just difficult, it's life-threatening. The government has imposed severe restrictions on Islamic practices, forbidding the construction or even the repair of mosques. Muslims are barred from certain public spaces, and their basic freedoms are regularly infringed upon. The Rohingya Muslims, in particular, have borne the brunt of these injustices, facing mass displacement, ethnic cleansing, and even genocide. According to the United Nations, more than 700,000 Rohingya were forced to flee to neighboring Bangladesh between 2016 and 2017, escaping unspeakable atrocities and violence. While Myanmar's treatment of its Muslim population has been internationally condemned, the persecution continues with little to no accountability. Global human rights organizations have raised alarms, but the situation remains dire. So if you're planning a trip to Myanmar, you might want to pack a little extra empathy. The ongoing humanitarian crisis shows no signs of letting up anytime soon. This tragic case is just the beginning of our exploration into the top 10 countries, where Muslims are not welcome. Stay tuned for more insights into regions where being Muslim is more of a challenge than it should ever be. Number 2, North Korea. Next on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome is North Korea, and let's be honest, it's not just Muslims who are facing trouble here. It's anyone with any religious beliefs. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, or even just spiritually curious, North Korea isn't the place to explore your faith. With a strict regime that controls almost every aspect of life, religious expression is not only discouraged, but outright forbidden. North Korea's population sits at around 25 million, and it's estimated that only about 0.1% identify as Muslim. However, even those tiny numbers tell a bleak story. There are no mosques in the country, no access to halal food, and definitely no Islamic holidays. The government keeps an iron grip on religious practices, and if you're caught practicing any form of faith, the consequences are severe. Remember how people joke about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Well, in North Korea, what happens to those caught practicing religion stays locked away in one of their infamous prison camps, possibly forever. The regime's stance on religion is part of its broader control over society. Citizens are expected to show loyalty only to the state, and anything that competes with that, including religion, is seen as a threat. This means there's virtually no public or private space for Muslims to practice or even talk about their beliefs. It's hard to think of a country less welcoming to religion, making North Korea a prominent feature on our list. While North Korea earns its spot in the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome, the reality is that this repressive regime doesn't roll out the red Central African Republic pet for anyone, religious or otherwise. So if you're thinking about a trip to Pyongyang, well, maybe think again. Number 3. Japan. Ah, Japan, land of sushi, samurai, and stunning temples. But what about for Muslims? You might be surprised to learn that while Japan is renowned for its hospitality and fascinating culture, it's not exactly the easiest place for Muslims to live or even visit. With a population of 128 million, Japan is 98% ethnically Japanese, and the Muslim population is estimated to be between 100,000 and 200,000, so just a tiny fraction of the country's demographic. Unlike some other countries on this list, Japan doesn't actively restrict Islamic practices, but the lack of infrastructure and support makes things a bit challenging. Halal food? It's not impossible to find, but it's about as rare as a vending machine that doesn't sell something quirky. While you can discover some halal restaurants in big cities like Tokyo or Osaka, venture into rural Japan, and you might struggle to find anything halal-friendly. As for mosques, they do exist, but there are only around 100 mosques in the entire country, and they're mostly in major urban centers. So, if you're a Muslim traveler or resident, you'll need to plan ahead and be ready to adapt. Muslims in Japan often find themselves going out of their way to practice their faith. Finding prayer spaces can be tough, and Islamic holidays pass by with little recognition. And while Japan doesn't have any official policies restricting Muslims, the societal and cultural infrastructure isn't exactly conducive to Islamic life. So despite Japan's peaceful reputation, it still ranks on the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome list due to these unique challenges. If you're planning a trip to Japan as a Muslim, consider packing some extra snacks because finding halal options may take a little more effort than you'd expect. Japan is a beautiful country full of rich traditions, but for Muslims, it comes with its fair share of difficulties. Number 4. Angola. Angola might be famous for its vast oil reserves and stunning landscapes, but for Muslims, it's not exactly a welcoming paradise. With a population of 32 million, about 2.5%, or approximately 990,000, identify as Muslim. You might think that this relatively small population would find some room for peaceful coexistence, but the reality is a little less accommodating. Despite its natural beauty, Angola earns its place on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome due to the significant challenges the Muslim community faces in practicing their faith. For starters, Angola has no officially recognized mosques. That's right, none. The government has reportedly banned the construction of mosques, citing that Islam is not an officially recognized religion. This makes it nearly impossible for Muslims to gather for communal prayers, and even Friday prayers can be a logistical nightmare. Muslims who wish to practice their faith often have to do so in private or in makeshift spaces, which is far from ideal. And if you're looking for halal food, well, that's another uphill battle. Finding halal options in Angola is like looking for a needle in a haystack, leaving Muslims with limited food choices and significant cultural hurdles. The situation in Angola isn't as extreme as in some of the other countries on this list. There aren't widespread violent crackdowns or mass displacements. But the lack of religious infrastructure and general apathy towards Islam make life difficult for Muslims. It's a place where practicing your faith quietly might be your best bet, but even then it can feel isolating. So if you're thinking of visiting Angola and you're Muslim, be sure to plan ahead. Bring your own food, scout out prayer spaces, and be prepared to face a society where Islam isn't exactly given the warmest reception. Angola may boast beautiful scenery, but for Muslims, it comes with some serious obstacles. No wonder it finds a spot on the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. Number 5. China. China, home to the Great Wall, ancient history, and a population of 1.4 billion. But for its 25 million Muslims, mostly from the Uyghur ethnic group, China is not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Despite being one of the largest and most powerful countries in the world, China has gained international attention for its strict and often harsh treatment of its Muslim population, particularly in the Xinjiang region, where most of the Uyghur Muslims reside. Xinjiang has been a hotbed of controversy, with the Chinese government implementing severe surveillance and control measures over Islamic practices, all under the guise of national security. The government claims that these actions are necessary to curb extremism, but the reality is far more alarming. Muslims in Xinjiang are subjected to constant monitoring, restrictions on religious expression, and perhaps most disturbingly, the infamous re-education camps. These camps, which have drawn widespread international condemnation, aim to strip Uyghurs of their cultural and religious identities, forcing them to renounce their Islamic faith and embrace the state's ideology. China's approach to Islam is like using a sledgehammer to fix a watch, harsh, blunt, and entirely disproportionate. The measures taken have been described as cultural genocide by human rights organizations, and it's estimated that over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in these camps. Restrictions include bans on religious dress like hijabs and beards, limitations on fasting during Ramadan, and even outlawing Islamic names for newborns. Given these oppressive conditions, it's no surprise that China ranks high on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. If you're thinking of visiting China, especially Xinjiang, you might want to be very cautious. What happens there is far from the rich cultural experience China is known for. The treatment of Muslims in this region remains one of the most pressing human rights issues in the world today, and the global community continues to keep a close eye on developments. Before we dive deeper into the remaining countries on our list, if you're finding this video eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian for more thought-provoking content just like this. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future videos. And now let's get back to exploring the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. Number 6. Central African Republic. Nestled in the heart of Africa, the Central African Republic has been a country in turmoil for over a decade, with its civil war and religious conflict ripping through its population since 2013. With a population of around 5.5 million, roughly 8.9% of whom are Muslim, the nation has become a dangerous place for its Islamic community, making it a clear candidate for our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. The roots of the conflict in Central African Republic are complex, but one of the most devastating aspects is the religious violence that has erupted between Christian militias, known as the anti-Balaka, and Muslim communities, represented largely by the Seleka rebel groups. What started as a political uprising quickly devolved into violent religious conflict, with Muslims caught in the crossfire. In the chaos, Muslims have been disproportionately targeted, facing brutal persecution, forced displacement, and destruction of their homes and mosques. Entire Muslim villages have been razed to the ground, and many Muslims have fled the country, seeking refuge in neighboring nations. To paint a picture of the scale of the crisis, over 1.2 million people have been displaced since the conflict began, many of them from the Muslim minority. The violence has been so severe that it has been described as ethnic cleansing by various human rights groups. Mosques have been attacked, religious leaders killed, and whole Muslim communities have been decimated. It's a harrowing reality that's hard to comprehend, especially in the 21st century. International efforts to restore peace and stability have made little headway, and the situation remains volatile. Despite peacekeeping missions and diplomatic interventions, the deep-rooted religious tensions continue to flare up, making life unbearably dangerous for Muslims in Central African Republic. Sadly, this is why the Central African Republic earns a spot on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. The conflict shows no sign of resolution, and the Muslim community remains one of its primary victims. Number 7. India. India, with its rich tapestry of cultures, religions, and languages, is home to 1.4 billion people. Muslims, who make up roughly 15% of the population, have long been a part of India's diverse social fabric. However, in recent years, the relationship between the Hindu majority and the Muslim minority has become increasingly strained, placing India on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. Despite having one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, approximately 200 million, India has seen rising tensions that have made it a challenging place for Muslims to feel truly accepted. A significant turning point came in 2019 with the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, which sparked widespread protests and controversy. The CAA allows a path to citizenship for religious minorities from neighboring countries, except for Muslims. This exclusion has been widely criticized as discriminatory, and many see it as an attempt to marginalize Muslims further. The act ignited protests across the country, leading to clashes between communities and growing anti-Muslim sentiment. Beyond the CAA, incidents of mob violence, lynching, and communal riots targeting Muslims have increased, fueled by growing political and social polarization. Anti-Muslim rhetoric has found a louder voice in Indian politics, and the Muslim community has often found itself at the receiving end of hostile narratives. Despite India's constitutional commitment to secularism, religious freedom, and equality, these events have raised concerns about the safety and security of Muslims in the country. India's complexity as a nation cannot be understated. It's a land of deep cultural and religious roots, and it has historically embraced diversity. However, its current trajectory regarding religious freedoms, particularly for Muslims, has raised alarm both domestically and internationally. Beneath the surface of its vibrant culture and heritage lies a complex web of social issues, which is why India finds itself on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. If you're planning to visit, it's worth being aware of these underlying tensions. Number 8. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, a stunning island nation with a population of 22 million, is predominantly Buddhist, with around 70% of the population adhering to Buddhism. Muslims, however, make up approximately 9.7% of the population, and while they have lived in Sri Lanka for centuries, recent years have seen a significant rise in tensions between the Muslim minority and the majority Buddhist community. This growing hostility, particularly after the 2019 Easter bombings carried out by Islamic extremists, has landed Sri Lanka on our list of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. The tragic bombings, which targeted Christian churches and luxury hotels, led to widespread fear and backlash against the Muslim community, even though the majority of Muslims in Sri Lanka had no connection to the attacks. Since then, Muslims in Sri Lanka have faced increasing violence and discrimination. Mobs have attacked mosques, Muslim-owned businesses have been targeted, and there has been a rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric, often fueled by nationalist Buddhist groups. Public displays of Islamic religious practices, such as wearing the niqab or burqa, have also come under scrutiny, with certain localities imposing restrictions on Islamic dress. In addition to these societal tensions, the Sri Lankan government has implemented policies that many view as discriminatory towards Muslims. Mosques have been targeted for closure or demolition, and some Islamic rituals have been restricted, particularly after the Easter bombings. For instance, in 2020, Sri Lanka implemented a controversial ban on Muslim burials during the COVID-19 pandemic, citing public health concerns, which angered the Muslim community and human rights advocates who argued it was discriminatory. Despite being a small minority, Muslims in Sri Lanka face significant challenges in both their public and private lives, as tensions continue to simmer beneath the surface of this otherwise picturesque country. While Sri Lanka boasts beautiful beaches, ancient temples, and a rich cultural history, the growing discrimination against its Muslim population casts a long shadow over its otherwise stunning landscapes. For these reasons, Sri Lanka earns its place in our top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. Number 9. Bhutan. Bhutan, often hailed as the land of the thunder dragon and famous for its stunning Himalayan vistas and serene Buddhist monasteries, might seem like the ultimate peaceful paradise. However, for the small Muslim community living within its borders, Bhutan can feel somewhat isolating. With a population of around 800,000, the Muslim population is estimated to be only around 5,000 to 7,000 people. While those numbers may seem small, their challenges are significant, especially when it comes to practicing their faith in a country where public displays of Islamic practices are highly restricted. One of the most striking facts about Bhutan is that there are no official mosques, none at all. For a Muslim community, even a small one, this lack of infrastructure makes practicing Islam in the open nearly impossible. Muslims in Bhutan cannot gather for communal prayers in official spaces, and the absence of mosques means that Friday prayers, an essential part of Islamic practice, are either held privately in homes or not at all. There are no Islamic schools, and halal food options are scarce, leaving many Muslims feeling disconnected from their religious and cultural traditions. The Bhutanese government places a strong emphasis on preserving its Buddhist identity, which is central to its national culture and policies. While Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, a unique measure of the nation's well-being, makes headlines, it seems the concept of happiness doesn't fully extend to religious minorities like the Muslim population. Islam simply doesn't fit into the country's vision of cultural preservation, and this makes life harder for the Muslims who call Bhutan home. Despite its global reputation as a peaceful and happy nation, Bhutan's Muslim population is often left on the margins, making it clear why this small yet challenging country finds its way onto our top 10 countries, where Muslims are not welcome list. The serene landscapes and tranquil monasteries may draw tourists from around the world, but for Muslims, Bhutan can feel like a kingdom without a place for their faith. Number 10. Slovakia. Rounding out our list of the top 10 countries, where Muslims are not welcome is Slovakia, a small Central European country with a population of 5.4 million. Muslims account for less than 0.1% of the population, but despite their tiny numbers, Slovakia has made practicing Islam nearly impossible. In fact, Slovakia has taken an official stance against recognizing Islam as a religion, and this small Muslim community faces significant obstacles in their everyday lives. In 2016, Slovakia passed a law that essentially blocks Islam from being recognized as an official religion. This legislation makes it extremely difficult for the Muslim community to establish any formal religious institutions. The most glaring example of this is the complete lack of mosques in the country. Yes, you heard that right. There are no mosques in Slovakia. Muslims are forced to gather for prayers in private homes or makeshift spaces, as there are no official places of worship for them to congregate. Former Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico once publicly stated, "Islam has no place in Slovakia," and it seems the government has taken that sentiment to heart. Beyond the legal roadblocks, Muslims in Slovakia face an atmosphere of hostility toward their faith. Public attitudes often reflect the government's official stance, making it challenging for Muslims to practice their religion openly without facing discrimination or exclusion. It's somewhat ironic that a country with such a minuscule Muslim population would take such extreme measures to prevent the growth of Islam. With less than 5,000 Muslims in the entire country, Slovakia's efforts to restrict Islamic practices feel disproportionate, to say the least. Nonetheless, these policies have made Slovakia a difficult place for Muslims to live and practice their faith, earning it the final spot on our list. While Slovakia may be known for its charming medieval towns and scenic landscapes, for the Muslim community, it's a place of significant challenges. The combination of legal restrictions and societal attitudes has made life difficult for Muslims, even though they represent only a tiny fraction of the population. This is why Slovakia stands out as one of the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. And there you have it, the top 10 countries where Muslims are not welcome. From outright bans to cultural and legal challenges, these countries make it incredibly difficult for Muslims to practice their faith freely. It's eye-opening to see how different regions handle religious diversity, and it's a reminder of the ongoing struggles for religious freedom across the globe. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update on future videos like this one. And of course, we want to hear from you. What did you think about these countries? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.